Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a new project for you guys. This is going to be a quick, short documentation of all the damage on this engine. I'm just going to basically go through all of the work that this engine will require. And yeah, so let's get started. This is a Hallmark Santa Fe 210-4. It is the 5000 number, which, as you guys know, is nicknamed Madame Queen. It is preserved to this day. This is Santa Fe's first ever 210-4 that they intentionally made. Technically speaking, they had a 210-4 that was made prior to this. They basically just took a 210-2 and added a four-wheel trailing truck. But in all intents and purposes, that engine is just a 210-2. This is their first purpose-designed 210-4, the 5000. Afterwards, they made the far more common 5001 class and 5011 class, which is is pretty common. That is the standard Santa Fe 210-4 that they made many of. But this is the one and only kind of one-off prototype 210-4 engine that was actually successful. And yeah, this thing has gained quite a bit of fame, being such a really beautiful engine. And yeah, so obviously this thing differs from the 5001 class by quite a few regards. It has an Let's Go feed water heater. All the piping is very different. It looks much more like the older design than the other 5000 class engines. It also has smaller drivers, as you can see. They're not disc drivers, they're just regular spoked drivers. The tender is rather unique. You won't see this kind of tender anywhere else. Maybe I think a few other engines have this tender, but for the most part, this is rather unique. And yeah, this is just a very unique looking engine, very strange indeed. And I think it looks really pretty. This engine in particular is made by Hallmark models. Here's the original box, as you can see right here. Yeah, Hallmark is an interesting manufacturer. Their models, strictly speaking, like visually, are beautiful. They're very accurate. The details are very fine. All of the piping is not oversized. They actually used very fine brass wire to make all the piping. They're just absolutely beautiful engines, and as it's very obvious, you can see how detailed this thing is. I mean, the level of detail on this thing is insane. There's so much. The problem with Hallmark is because the detail is so fine, and the brass they use is rather brittle, and also the quality of the solder jobs is rather poor. And so what you end up getting is a lot of the fine brass details tend to break off because, as I said, it's so brittle, it's so fine, and the solder job is rather poor. So what you get is an engine that's really easy to break or get damaged. And that is really unfortunate, to be honest. I mean, I think it's okay. As long as you're very delicate with your engine and you handle it with care, you'll be fine. However, if you get this kind of engine and it's handled very poorly, as this engine shows, you get a lot of damage. And that's what we're going to go through today. So, yeah, I bought this engine for $175 only, but it will need a lot of work. So, yeah, $175 is really cheap for this kind of engine. Pristine, these engines go for around $700, maybe $800. The proper, paint job, it could be worth $890. Without a paint job, it's worth $700 around there, maybe $600. But yeah, so this is a great deal on this engine. However, as I said, it'll need a lot of work, and that's what I'll get into. So first off, the number one thing is the paint job. The paint job from far away looks really good, but from any sort of distance, it's very obvious that the paint job is very poor. The tender paint job is okay. The decal, as you can see here, is very, they didn't do a gloss coat, so you can see the decals right there. You can see, the gloss is where the decal is at. The end here is paint. The paint on the end here is rather poor. As you can see from any angle, there's a weird, cloudy grayish kind of tone to the end here, and the decal job is pretty atrocious. Front here is also rather inconsistent. The sides are nice and glossy. The front here is really musty and whatnot. So the tender, also the bottom is just not glossy at all, which is interesting. But the tender paint is actually not that bad. The engine paint's really where it suffers. If I get close up to this thing, you can see how gritty and how gritty the paint is. It looks pretty terrible. There's a lot of grime and dirt in the paint. The paint came out, looks like the paint came out dry, kind of. The overall finish is a mix of matte and gloss. You can see how the gloss is not evenly coated over the engine. The gray accents, here, the front and the firebox, is hand painted, and it looks rather terrible, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, the paint is not great. Also, the fact is that the guy did a terrible job masking the engine. As you can see, the rods are just a mess. There's just black paint some places and not in other places. Yeah, it just looks rather messy. And also the bottom is not painted for some reason. So like, you know, this trailer truck, for example, it just looks really weird. A lot of places are just not painted entirely. And there's obviously a whole bunch of scratches, like in the front here, near the cab, in the rear. I mean, it's just a messy paint job. But I think it looks good overall. I'm definitely going to strip this paint. I think the guy did an okay job, but it could be a lot better. And so I'm definitely going to be stripping this engine. That'll be the very first thing I do. Not only because the paint is terrible, but also I need to do some solder repair jobs, and you can't really solder on painted brass. You have to remove the paint in order to solder things properly to give a really good solid solder connection. So with that being said, let's actually talk about all the solder jobs that will need to be repaired. The very first thing here is this rod here. I don't know the term for this rod, but as you can see here, it is actually not the original rod. It is actually copper. It's kind of hard to tell, but it is copper. It is not nickel plated, and that implies that the original owner actually fabricated their own rod here, which begs the question, what happened to the original rod? Did it break off? Did it snap in half? In any case, though, the original owner did fabricate this own rod, and he tried to solder it to the crosshead here. If you guys didn't know, this rod has to actually pivot on the crosshead. It should connect to the screw here because it has to rotate over the crosshead. And a solder job is definitely not going to fix that, because solder joints are brittle, or they're static. They can't rotate freely. And so that was inherently just a terrible idea. I don't know what the guy was doing, but he messed up, to say the least. So this will have to be, I'll have to remove this rod and kind of fabricate my own, drill a hole in it, and then put it through the screw. That is the first issue. The second issue is on this side. As you can see here, this crosshead guide, and also this ladder is just broken off. This piece right here is not connected to the cylinders at all. This ladder here is snapped at this area. This plate right here. This part is snapped. You see, I could put my little stick through, and then this joint that's kind of clinging on. That's, you know, allowing this thing to even hold on remotely is just very loose and weak. So this will have to have a complete solder job, which is not that difficult to repair. And yeah, also you can note that this side is done properly. You can see that this rod right here is connected to the screw here and allowed to pivot. The third issue is this piece right here. This is actually backwards. This thing should curve to the left, but instead it curves to the right. And that is because when the original owner tried to reassemble this engine, you accidentally put a rod onto the wrong side. This rod should be on the other side, and that rod should be on this side, and that's why this lever here should go to the left. I forgot the terminology. I didn't bother Googling it before I made this video, but as you can see here, it should curve to the left. It should curve to the left, but instead on my model, it curves to the right, which is very strange. So it makes it look very very whack. And also you can see that they used a third-party screw here. They used a Phillips head screw, which is clearly not the original screw on this model. That raises a lot of questions, you know, but I'm not going to worry about that. So that is the third issue. And the fourth issue here is just this little detail here. This is, I believe, the stoker engine, and as you can see here, it is loose. It hasn't fallen off yet, but it is loose, and I feel like it can fall off at any moment. Other than that, though, I actually checked, and surprisingly speaking, all of these, you know, details, all these pipes and rods and everything are actually solidly attached to the engine. Nothing has snapped off or broken, nothing is loose, and that is really good to see. But yeah, so there's 4 issues, as I said, one here, the rods being backwards, and then this thing here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 4 issues with this engine that'll have to be repaired. The problem with the tender, there's 2 problems here. One of them is that this handrail on top here is not only just completely bent, it's completely sideways, but also it's broken off on one end. You can see it. It's supposed to attach that little hole here, but instead it's just kind of completely bent off. This little vent here is also kind of bent sideways, but this will be difficult to fix, but this will be relatively easy. The last issue is if I flip this up around, you'll see that there's a little handrail at the bottom here, and they're held by these little eye bolts or you know, mounts. And there's 12 of them in total, and of the 12, there are 5 that are broken. So this one here, that one's broken, this one's solid. I believe this one is broken, or no, this one's broken. This one is just completely flying off. That one's definitely broken. This one here is broken. Yeah, that one's broken. This one here is broken. You can see, and then also that one there is broken. As you see, they should be like this. They should be solidly attached, but instead these are just kind of loose. These are fine. It just requires a solder job. I just have to resolder the mounts onto the bottom of the tender bottom plate. But yeah, 5 of the little eye bolts are broken, and so therefore that will require even more soldering. So that is it in terms of all the solder repair that this thing will require. Not exactly fun, but it's kind of expected for Hallmark models, to be honest, so I'm not really surprised. It's mostly this solder repair job and the other rod repair that's going to take a lot of time, because those parts are moving. You know, there's force that is pushed against those, and that's a result. Those need to sustain some pressure, and that's the reason why those solder jobs have to be really solid. And seeing those break off is really heartbreaking. Anyways, so that is it for those details. Now let's talk about the mechanism. So as you saw, as I hinted at, the engine is free rolling right now. There is a slight bind, however, there isn't. It's, yeah, you can see like it's definitely binding, but we'll have to see what's up with that. So that's a bind. That's not fun to fix, but we'll see what happens. It'll definitely be, you know, having the more wheels you have, the higher the chance there's a bind in the system. So that'll be real fun to try to fix. Another thing is that it's missing the gearbox. The gearbox is actually included, which is really cool. You can see the worm gear at the bottom there. I hate how the rear truck and front truck are just kind of wobbling, by the way. I wish there was some sort of thing that limited its rotation. But anyways, yeah, so the original gearbox is included. From my experience, I've only had one other Hallmark engine, so I don't have much experience in this stuff. But from my experience, that Hallmark engine runs really well with the stock gearbox. So I'm pretty glad that this thing came with the original gearbox. I didn't want to spend another $40 on a Northwest Shortline gearbox. So it's nice that it did come with it. However, it didn't come with the original motor. It also might not come with the screws. I'm not really sure. But anyways, the original motor is gone. I do believe these originally came with CAN motors, although I'm not sure. Usually, if an engine has a cab backhead, it did come with a CAN motor. And on Brass Trains, it does say it came with a CAN motor. Yeah, CAN motor. However, this thing is missing the motor, so that'll be interesting to find. I'll just probably replace it with a standard whatever motor I can find. That's not the issue. The motor is really easy to find, but it just requires more work. I need to figure out what is causing the bind in this engine, add the gearbox and the motor, and make sure everything's in tune. Also, because this thing is so poorly painted, I would not be surprised if there's paint inside the bearings of the wheels, so that will be real fun to try to remove the paint from the insides of the engine. But yeah, so overall this engine needs a lot of mechanical repair, which is actually my specialty. I specialize in mechanical repair and electronics like DCC sound and lights and whatnot. So this is right up my alley. Painting is my weakness, and so I don't know if I'll be able to paint this engine, but we'll see how this goes. So yeah, in total though, in summation, this engine will need a lot of work. However, I do feel like the work that this engine needs is really easy. It will be not easy, but I am confident in the fact that I will be able to successfully repair this engine. So that is something, I guess, to be happy about. There's no like major problems like a requartering or like, you know, some damage like, you know, like a dent in the brass. That would be a nightmare. I couldn't fix that at all. So fortunately, the repairs are, while not easy, they should be. I should be able to fix this engine up. And yeah. Now, whether I'm going to keep this engine is a whole other question. As you guys know, I have 22-inch radius curves, and even in my future layout, I don't think I can use curves on my layout that this engine will need. This is a massive engine, and as you guys know, brass engines need really wide curves. Seeing how the front truck is has an outside bearing, which means that it limits the how much it can turn left and right. This engine will need at least, in my opinion, if I were to guess, probably at least 36-inch curves, possibly 40-inch curves, in order for it to run smoothly. And the track work has to be pristine, because this engine seems like the kind of engine that would just kind of derail wherever, even on the smallest kink or whatever. So I don't know if I'm going to keep this engine. It is an absolutely beautiful engine, as you guys can see. It's just that it's a real shame. Also, the motherfucker actually pivots, which is really, really cool. Anyways, this is an absolutely beautiful engine, and I would love to keep this, but realistically, I'm not sure if I can get that much use out of this. If I sell it off, not only will I make some money, but I'm sure someone who actually has the capabilities running this engine can run this engine, and I feel like they'll get a lot more enjoyment out of this than if I were to own it, which in my case would just be kind of sitting statically on a shelf until one day I might make a layout that's big enough for this engine. But yeah, I'm still kind of debating if I'm going to keep this engine, but I will definitely be repairing this for sure, and I do look forward to seeing how this thing turns out. So yeah, we'll see how this engine turns out. I'll try to update you guys if I do remember to. But yeah, so I'm definitely looking forward to working on this engine. I will actually be stripping the paint, or disassembling it and stripping the paint as soon as this video is over, which is right about now. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, let me know what I should do with this engine, guys. I honestly don't really know. It's a beautiful engine, but it's just not really useful for me, being so massive. So yeah. Oh, actually, one more thing I forgot to mention. This thing is missing weight. It is very, very light. It is lighter than most BLI engines, in fact. I feel like it's missing the weight entirely, but it could be just a really tiny, wimpy weight, lead weight inside. But yeah, this thing feels almost like a toy because it's so light, which is crazy. But anyways, so I gotta stop talking. This video is getting way too long. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Alright, I fully disassembled the Madame Queen. And yeah, so it was actually pretty straightforward because there's no weight in the engine boiler is just one piece. So, and I didn't bother removing the rods off of each wheel. Although if I have to, I will. But I feel like it won't affect the paint stripping process. But yeah, so I am going to be putting everything inside these aluminum baskets. I actually intentionally deformed this one here because the engine boiler was too long, so I had to kind of extend, push out the ends in order to fit it in here. But yeah, everything will be placed inside these baskets, and then it will be stripped with lacquer thinner and a toothbrush, an old toothbrush. So yeah, that will be pretty straightforward. One thing I want to note is this frame. This frame looks horrendous, and yeah, so this right here, these marks here, is proof that the guy didn't remove the wheels before painting. You could see where the paint went through the spokes of the wheel and where the wheel kind of blocked off the paint. And what you get is this disgusting looking thing, which just looks terrible, especially when the wheels, when the engine's moving, you could easily see the unpainted areas of this frame, and it just looks terrible. So yet another more proof that this engine was very poorly painted. But yeah, so everything is disassembled, and everything went really smoothly. No additional damage occurred, and yeah, so let's begin with the stripping. One thing I forgot to mention is, by the way, I have the parts in these 3 baskets, is there's insulation on the wheels, whether that's the drive wheels, the pilot, or the trailing truck wheels, or even the tender wheels. You know that there's wheels obviously have insulation, and oftentimes insulation will be plastic. Sometimes it's fiber, and some types of plastic, not all plastics, but some plastics will melt if soaked in lacquer thinner. And that's why I have these in a separate basket, because I am going to put lacquer thinner in these 2, but I don't want to risk melting away the insulation, which is basically impossible to fix. And so I'm just going to put these in probably isopropanol alcohol 91%. Which is also a paint stripper, although a little bit less effective. But yeah, just remember that any, plastics have a chance of melting, and so be careful with, what types of plastics, or what you put inside lacquer thinner. So just a heads up. Okay, so after a long gap between stripping the paint and now, as you can see, this thing's finally done. Unfortunately, I forgot to record any footage of me actually working on the engine, after the paint was stripped and repairing all the brass detail parts and whatever, doing all the repairs. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the end result here. I do have some photos I took, so I'll probably sprinkle them in the video, in between the video clips, so you can see that. Hopefully you saw that and it was, at least made some sense of what I did. But yeah, so I'm just gonna review everything I did again, as I said. So first off, this rod here was replaced. I basically made my own rod, and then I used a separate rivet that I had to rivet in myself, which was just a Bowser brass rivet. That's repaired now. Some parts broke off. Some, delicate brass joints broke off during the paint stripping process, which is expected. So that one was one that broke off. The thing here, the cylinder cocks, I believe they're called. These broke off. What else? The cab handrail here broke off, which I had to repair. On this side, let's see. This ladder solder joint was repaired. There's a joint here that was repaired. What else? This joint right here was repaired also. This cylinder, which was previously loose, is now mounted properly, and this is now actually mounted properly. There was a joint here that broke off, the injectors to this pipe. That's now repaired. And just, yeah, overall, just a whole lot of solder repair jobs that had to be done. Very good practice for soldering. The mechanism is now requartered. All the wheels are now running very smoothly. In fact, hopefully in one of the shots you saw how free-rolling the wheels were. So that implies no binding. All these eccentric, whatever you call these, this rod here was replaced, or was, swapped because it was backwards at first. And yeah, so the entire mechanism is now very free rolling. In fact, I'll take it down later to the basement to show you how it runs, but it runs, it's not, the gearbox isn't the best, but as far as like the mechanism itself goes, like the springs are very soft, and it is a very good runner. And yeah, so yeah, just all the repair jobs are all done. This engine is now more or less complete. The only issue is I didn't realize until recently that it's actually missing the power reverse here. That's why there's a big gap here. And so I need to source a replacement part from Skill, but currently I don't have one on hand, so it's gonna look like this for just a little bit. But otherwise, this thing is basically complete. I looked at all the photos of the original Hallmarks, and this looks just as good. A very beautiful model, as you can see. Like there's some, like the chimney actually, or smokestack actually unhinges. The bell swivels, obviously. Just a very beautiful engine, and this will need a little bit more work. The headlight is a bit too high. I want to lower that. For some reason, the Alesco feed water heater is mounted on this really thick piece of brass, and this is not meant to be there. So I'm gonna remove this and replace it probably with a thinner sheet of brass and just lower the Alesco feed water heater. Also, Alesco feed water heater doesn't actually stick out enough. It's actually very flat against the smoke box. It doesn't extend past it. So I'm gonna also just push this just a little bit forward when I do the modifications. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it as is. One more thing is that the bell is mounted in the wrong position. There should be a bracket in the front here that the bell is mounted on that sticks out, and that this is currently not how it looks. So that also needs to be done. But yeah, just the front end looks a little bit weird. That's the reason why it doesn't look quite like the 5,000 engine you see today in Texas. So yeah, it looks a little bit off, and so I want to correct those issues to make this look more accurate, like what the prototype did. Hallmark, I think, tried to use blueprints from this 5000 class as it was built. That's the reason why the bell's mounted in an older fashion. But they paired it with a oil tender, and also had the extended chimney or smokestack. So that implies that they took the old drawings but made a modernized 5000 class, and so that's the reason why it looks a little bit off. But those modifications should help how it looks. And so yeah, that's the engine complete. As far as the tender goes, I repaired this solder joint. It's not the best looking solder joint. As you can see, there's some bare solder, but this thing is now very solid. It is missing one of the arms. I also soldered this one, by the way. It is missing the arm in the middle, but I'll replace that soon. And then also of the the 14 little brackets holding these two pipes in place. I remember that I think 8 of them were broke, or anyways, I had to resolder 8 of them, and so now this thing is very solid. It doesn't move at all, so that's nice. So yeah, that's the engine and tender completely done. I'm very happy with how it turned out. And yeah, so as I said, I probably actually will be keeping this engine. It is a very beautiful engine, and so what I plan to do is Eventually I'm gonna, you know, do these modifications, replace the power reverse, replace this little handrail here. But otherwise, this thing just needs paint and DCC sound. I did add a mabuchi can motor inside. The gearbox was completely stripped of all the old grease and paint and redone, relubed. Hopefully you saw that in one of the photos. And yeah, as I said, I added a mabuchi can motor with tubing as the drive shaft. Ideally, I want to replace that with a universal coupling thing, but for now, tubing is all I have, so that's what I'm using right now, but that will hopefully be replaced. And yeah, this thing just needs paint and DCC sound. This will definitely be a very, you know, late in the future project, because I have a lot of other brass engines that have priority over this engine, because this engine obviously won't run on my layout. It can only run on the straight tracks. It won't run on my 22-inch curves, and so I want to, I have some other engines that also need paint and DCC sound, like my Pennsylvania Railroad G5 or E6, which will actually run on my layout. So those have priority over this engine, because again, this thing won't run properly on my layout. So yeah, anyways, but this will be in a future project, but I will be keeping this engine for now. And I'm very excited about that, because this is absolutely a gorgeous engine. I mean, just to look at the detail on this thing, it is stunning how much detail there is on this thing. A very beautiful engine by Hallmark, and a very nice engine indeed. So anyways, I'm gonna just at the really end, I'm just gonna show you a little clip of this thing running. And so yeah, let's get started with that. One more thing I actually forgot to mention is that if you remember, this engine didn't come with weights inside the boiler. This engine was very light as a result, and I mentioned in the first clip, I believe, that it felt plasticky almost, because it felt cheap and plasticky because it was so light. So because I couldn't find a replacement weight, I just ended up using a whole bunch of these 1/4 ounce stick-on weights. This will obviously have to be removed before painting, because, you know, stick-on is going to mess around with the painting process. But I basically just stuck 12 of these 1/4 ounce weights inside the entire length of the boiler. There's 6 on the left and 6 on the right side. And that creates, I believe, 3 ounces of weight inside the engine. So this thing is quite heavy now. It could be heavier, but it's already heavy enough to the point where it's nice and balanced now at the very least. And yeah, this thing could now pull quite a big load. So just wanted to mention that before I actually run this engine. Alright, so I have the Madame Queen on the layout right here, and as I said, this thing will not run on my 22-inch curves for fairly obvious reasons. It is a brass engine, and brass engines generally have smaller tolerances than ready-to-run engines these days, because they are built to more prototypical standards. A curve that this engine would run on in real life would probably be equivalent to around 35 to 40 inch radius curves in HO scale. So it won't run on these curves. And honestly, I don't mind that it doesn't do that. You know, if BLI were to make this engine, they'd probably add like 2 or 1 or maybe even 3 blind drivers, and I think that's just ridiculous. I think this is nice the way it is. And yeah, so anyways, we're just gonna run this on this straight piece of track all the way to around there. So before we begin, I just want to quickly say this engine runs great. It's not really noisy. I think the noises are rather quiet, but the microphone on this phone camera might pick it up extraordinarily well in order to compensate for how quiet it is. But it runs fairly quietly, and it runs very smoothly. But the biggest issue for this engine is that it doesn't really have a very great slow speed control. I'm sure I can tune this a little bit better, but for now, since the mechanism is mostly unlubricated, because again, I need to paint this still, it doesn't run super smoothly at slow speeds. But without further ado, let's get started. So let's go in reverse first, I guess. A little bit of squeaking, again, because there's not much lubrication. Uh-oh, there's a little bit of issue there. I need to clean the track. This track is rather dirty. But yeah, let's try slow speed. Oh, something seems rather dirty. Something needs to be cleaned. Interesting. Well, anyways, that's just dirty track. Please excuse that. The pickups on this engine aren't great either, so. But yeah, this thing runs pretty nicely. Some squeaking, as I said, which will be gone once this thing is properly painted and lubricated. But for now, it runs really well. So anyways, yeah, that is the end of this saga, I guess you would call it, this project. This is mostly restored. There's a little bit, you know, you still got to paint it, lubricate it, add DCC sound and lights and whatever. But for now, this is basically done. Again, it needs a little bit more work in terms of detail, but this thing is done at this point, and I think this is a pretty good success, especially considering from its initial condition. So yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this little project with me. I know these videos tend to be a little bit longer, and not everyone likes these. Especially seems like not many people watch Santa Fe on my channel, so it's a little bit unfortunate because I do model Santa Fe as a pretty large part of my roster is Santa Fe. So anyways, but hopefully you guys learned something, a tip or two from this restoration video. And yeah, so if you have any questions or comments, please comment down below, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.